It took until June, but the Orioles have finally swept a series here in 2025. But do we really feel any different about this Orioles team than we did back on Thursday? I'll recap the series against the White Sox coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast.
You are Locked On Orioles, your daily Baltimore Orioles podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey there, Orioles fans. Today is Monday, June 2nd, 2025, and welcome back into the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, Connor Newcomb. And coming up on today's episode, we are going to recap the Orioles' first sweep of the season as they took all three games from the Chicago White Sox this weekend. We'll talk about the incredible starting pitching the O's got from the combination of Zach Eflin, Dean Kremer, and Charlie Morton. And while the O's offense wasn't great, some more timely hitting and some good relief pitching led them to a series sweep. And then we'll talk about how it still wasn't perfect this weekend. And even with 3 wins in a row, there are still certainly a lot of issues with this Orioles roster. But that's all coming up on this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast. Before we get there, though, just did want to thank you for making Locked On Orioles your first podcast listen of the day. We're free and available on all podcast listening platforms, here with you 5 days per week, Monday through Friday. And you got your postcasts on the weekends as well that you can go and check out. But if you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, if you could subscribe to the show there, leave a 5-star rating and a review, it really, really helps out us over here at Locked On Orioles. And of course, we're here on YouTube as well. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to the Locked On Orioles YouTube channel. If you have any Orioles thoughts, you want to ask a mailbag question, want to talk some ball, whatever it may be, you can always email me, lockedonorioles@gmail.com. So let's talk about a series sweep. It is June 2nd, and it is the first time in 2025 we've got to talk about the Orioles sweeping a team. They've won a couple of series this year, but have not won all of them yet until this weekend. And if you looked at the schedule and you had to guess, hey, what's the series this year the Orioles are most likely to sweep, you probably would have said against the White Sox at home. This is the series you would have circled, and yeah, they did that. So at least we know that the Orioles came into this series. The only team that in the American League that had a worse record than them was the White Sox. They took all 3. So at least we now definitively know the Orioles are not the worst team in the American League. Otherwise, there are still some issues. But let's stay mostly on the positive side because, hey, they swept a series. They haven't done it all year. And let's start with the Friday night win. The Orioles winning it 2-1 on Friday to open up this series. And we begin with the 5 things you need to know from that Friday night victory. And the first thing you need to know from Friday is that Zach Eflin looked a lot more like his usual self. It was his longest start of the season and his 4th start as an Oriole since coming over at the deadline last year, where he has pitched 7 innings as he goes 7 scoreless against the White Sox on Friday evening. 4 hits, 6 strikeouts, 1 walk on 99 pitches for the right-hander. Remember, this was coming off a couple of very, very iffy starts against the Nats and the Red Sox for Eflin, coming back from that lat injury that caused him to miss about a month earlier this season. He looked a lot more like the Eflin we saw down the stretch last year in this start on Friday. After Friday's game, it was the 6th Orioles start of 7 innings or more this season, and the first since Tomoyuki Sugano did it back on May 9th. And the only other start of 7 scoreless this year by the O's was Dean Kremer on May 2nd. I mean, Eflin basically rolled through the first 6 innings of this game against the White Sox, and then he just started getting a little bit tired. And his issue in Boston when he allowed 4 earned runs in 5 innings last weekend is that he looked like he had some sort of small mechanical issue happening where he was losing a lot of pitches really badly arm side. So that's inside to righties, outside to lefties. And he wasn't able to like hook breaking balls back to the outside corner. You know, he wouldn't miss by 2 inches. He'd miss by like a foot with fastballs off the outside corner. It was kind of tough to watch. And that started happening again in the 7th. He allowed a single and a walk with 1 out in that game. And it was a tough decision for the Orioles at that point because they had just taken the 2-0 lead in the bottom of the 6th. Eflin goes back out there in the 7th. It was 6 scoreless. His pitch count was super low. It was an easy decision for Mansolino to send him back out there. But then he started to really labor through the 7th. And you start to get worried, like, is he going to blow this lead? There wasn't a lot of action happening in the bullpen, but he just barreled his way through it. Got a huge back-to-back strikeouts to end the inning, keep it at 2-0. Now, He got a little help from the umpire on the last strikeout, got a lot of help from Luis Robert chasing out of the zone on the first strikeout, but otherwise was a good mix of all 6 of Eflin's pitches. It was only a 49% in-zone rate for the start, so he still didn't have his best command, still didn't fully look 100%, either health-wise or that the mechanics are all the way back, but it was so much, just so much better. Really, even the first start off the IL against the Angels, 5 innings, 2 runs was fine, but he was not regular Zach Eflin. This was probably the first start since he had that lat injury where I felt like, hey, that's the Zach Eflin we came to know and love in the second half after the trade in 2024. And 7 scoreless against a bad offense, just exactly what you want from Zach Eflin, and he delivered in a Friday game that could have been tough for him, right? It was scheduled to be at 7. The Orioles moved the game up to 4:30 because of impending weather. That can be tough on a starting pitcher to have a 2.5-hour change like that, but he took it in stride and certainly pitched the Orioles to that win on Friday. Second thing you need to know from Friday's win is that Ryan Mountcastle made an impact in this game, and then he left the game. It ended up being a really weird May for Ryan Mountcastle. He hit 298 in the month. You look at that and you say 298 must have been a great month for Ryan Mountcastle. This is a guy who rarely hits that close to 300, and he's hitting 298, but it was completely empty. It was with a 394 slugging percentage. I mean, basically, it's all singles is what he was hitting. And his 2 singles on Friday gave him his 3rd consecutive multi-hit game, and that's great. And, you know, the Orioles had loaded the bases on a Mountcastle single in the 6th with nobody out. O'Hearn grounded into a force out at the plate, but Ramon Arias delivered a sac fly to put the Orioles up 1-0. And then with runners on first and third, the Orioles executed a pretty perfect double steal with 2 outs. Now, they were helped by Edgar Quero, the White Sox catcher, who made a terrible decision by not even looking Ryan Mountcastle back to third before he threw down to second. Throw went to second. Mountcastle broke from third, came home, and dove in safely for the second run to put the Orioles up 2-0. I think it's the first time we've seen the O's execute a play like that, not just this season, but in a while. But then Mountcastle was pretty immediately out of the game. Like, the O's did some shuffling, and Cooper Hummel came into the game, and O'Hearn shifted to first base. And, well, it turns out it was another hamstring issue. We're not 100% sure it happened on that steal of home play, but that was kind of the last thing we saw Mountcastle do in the game before he left. So a very odd month where he hits for a high average, but he's still hitting for no power. He's got just 2 home runs on the season, and he left with a hamstring injury. And on Saturday, the Orioles placed Mountcastle on the 10-day injured list with what they're calling a right hamstring strain. They're still waiting for what the full timeline is going to be, but Kobe Mayo was recalled to kind of take his role as right-handed hitting first base and DH. So another chance for Mayo, but just another injury for this Orioles team, just as Mountcastle was maybe getting going, right? 3 straight multi-hit games. And then he gets injured. It's seeming like it never ends at the moment. Third thing you need to know from Friday's game is there was really nothing else from the Orioles offense. They got those 2 runs, the sac fly and the double steal in the 6th, and that was all they scored. They had the 1 hit with a runner in scoring position in the 6th, but that was Mountcastle, who had the single that didn't even bring in a run. 7 hits, 1 walk, not a lot going on for the offense. It really doesn't help that, I mean, the Orioles are so injured, right? And then Mountcastle leaves this game. You didn't have Cedric Mullins, who was placed on the IL on Friday with a hamstring issue. We'll talk about that a little bit more today and on tomorrow's episode as well. But it got to the point where Emmanuel Rivera was the Orioles' starting DH in Friday's game. And there may have been points in the last 2 years where that was okay, right? Rivera was awesome at the end of last year. When he came up this year, when Westberg and Arias got hurt, he was red hot. So you're like, yeah, Connor, that's not the worst thing in the world. But Emmanuel Rivera is hitting just barely over 100 in the past couple of weeks. The magic has kind of worn off for him, and he was DHing in this game. That was the state of the Orioles position player group with all of the injuries. So not crazy surprising. They only scratched across 2 runs in Friday's game. Sean Burke, former Terp, had a nice outing as kind of the follower after Jared Schuster was the opener for the White Sox. But yeah, you get frustrated with the offense, but you also look at the lineup, and it's rough, some of the guys they have at the back half of things. Fourth thing you need to know from Friday afternoon's victory is that Brian Baker had a bounce-back outing in this one for the Orioles. The last time he had pitched was Tuesday night when he came into a 4-4 game in the top of the 8th against the Cardinals and had by far his worst outing of the year. Allowed a solo home run to Nolan Arenado, allowed a couple of triples where his outfield defense didn't help him too much, but he gave up a season-high 3 earned runs. It was only the second time all year he allowed multiple runs in an outing. He'd just been so good this year before that, but he bounced back. He comes in a 2-0 game in the 8th, looking to preserve the lead, and he goes 1-2-3, heavy on the fastball. 11 of his 14 pitches on Friday were that four-seam fastball. He really bounced back and then did so even more on Sunday, which we will get to. But the fifth and final thing you need to know from the Orioles' 2-1 series opening win over the White Sox on Friday is that Felix Bautista held on for the save in the 9th inning. Came out there in a 2-0 game, and Felix really has not had great command over the past couple of weeks. He's had some rough-looking outings. He was coming off back-to-back scoreless appearances, but he hung an 0-2 splitter and gave up a double to Mike Tauchman. Then Andrew Benintendi was all over a fastball, RBI double off the wall, made it a 2-1 game, and you really started to sweat. Yeah, Cooper Hummel, who one of the newest Orioles, had to come into the game when Mountcastle got hurt, didn't take a great route to that Benintendi RBI double in right field. Still a tough ball to catch. He hit it hard, but things were starting to snowball a little bit. Bautista was spraying fastballs up. I mean, the splitters were floating on him. He couldn't get them down. They were floating like way up, it was even better when they were out of the zone because some of them floated into the middle of the zone. And that's what led to the Tauchman double early in the inning. Then he walks a batter. Things get dicey, but first and second, 2 outs, 2-1 game. Throw some good splitters to finish off the outing, get the save. He did throw a season high 29 pitches, but it was enough to lock down a 2-1 victory and give the Orioles the W in the opener. So then they moved to Saturday and had a chance to win the series. And they played kind of a pretty similar low-scoring game again on Saturday, but they did lock down that series W, and I'll tell you how they did it coming up next. But first, this episode of the Locked On Orioles podcast is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that's both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Now, I'm personally a fan of the classic pistachios, getting to crack open every shell for that satisfying crunch. The in-shell options, those are my favorite. It kind of reminds me of cracking into a crab, and I did eat crabs for the first time this summer on Saturday as I watched the Orioles win, but that's what the classic pistachios give to me, and that's why I love them so much. But the no-shells variety is great too. It's like the perfect grab-and-go snack with so many great flavors. So get snackin' and get crackin' with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. So the O's got the 2-1 win on Friday, and they backed it up getting a series win with a 4-2 victory over the White Sox on Saturday. And let's get you the 5 things you need to know from that Orioles win in Game 2 of this series. And the first thing you need to know is Dean Kremer followed up Zach Eflin with a great start of his own. We talked about it plenty, how bad Dean was early in the year. A 7.04 ERA in March and April continued a career trend where Dean is just terrible in the first month of the year and then gets better as the season rolls on. And as soon as that calendar turned to May, remember, he threw 7 scoreless innings against the Royals on May 2nd, and he was off from there. He had a 2.72 ERA he finishes with in May in his 6th start, and he closed it out fantastic, closed out the month fantastically on Saturday. 6 innings of 1-run ball against this, albeit pretty bad, White Sox offense. He allowed 6 hits. He struck out 7 and walked 2 and threw 102 pitches, just 5 hard hit balls by the Chicago order against Dean Kremer. And he was good. He pounded the strike zone. He trusted the splitter more than we've seen recently. It was his 2nd most used pitch. He threw it a lot to the lefties in that Chicago order, and he was just dotting that sinker. And when Dean has been good this year, especially in the month of May, it's been that sinker. He's been able to throw it on the corners basically whenever he wants. That's a huge part of his repertoire, and that is what we saw time and time again on Saturday. Now, it wasn't a lot of swing and miss, just 8 whiffs on 48 swings by White Sox hitters, but he got a lot of foul balls, and those work too, right? They're not swings and misses, but they get you strikes without the ball going in play, and he mixed his stuff. He mixed his spots. He got soft contact. He got some, he still racked up 7 strikeouts, a lot of them looking in those 6 innings. And this, what we saw Saturday, is just kind of the ideal version of Dean Kremer, just like Friday was the ideal version of Zach Eflin. And he just grinded. It was just the 4th time this season that an Orioles starting pitcher has thrown at least 100 pitches in a game. Cade Povich and Tomoyuki Sugano each had starts of 103. And Kremer had another start of 102 back on April 22nd in DC. And Tony Mansolino could have pulled him after a 2-out walk in the 6th. He was at 101 pitches at that point. That's usually a time where you're over 100 pitches. You've just walked a batter. It's the 6th inning. The bullpen's ready to go at that point. That's probably a time where you could pull a guy, but you had a little bit of leeway. You're up 4-1 at that point. And Mansolino leaves him in. And what does he do? He gets a ground out on the very next pitch to finish those 6 strong innings. Just gotta love what you saw from Dean Kremer on Saturday. Second thing you need to know from that win in game 2 is that Jackson Holliday got things started with a bang. His first career leadoff home run got a cutter over the middle of the plate from Davis Martin on the 3rd pitch of the game in the bottom of the 1st inning, and he cranked that thing out to right field for a solo homer, 394 feet, hit it 109 off the bat. And it was a great ending to the month of May for Jackson, who hit 287 with an 819 OPS in May, mostly in the leadoff spot. And Tony Mansolino had an interesting quote after Saturday's game. He said when he took over as manager, he told Holliday, like, hey, you're going to be in the lineup every day. Unless you just truly need a day off, righty, lefty, it doesn't matter. You're going to be out there. But he also told him, hey, you're going to have the leadoff spot for now. That might not be guaranteed. He told Holliday, we got a lot of great players on the injured list. As they come back, we might switch things up. And if we, see Kowser and Westberg and Laureano and O'Neill return here in the next couple of weeks, maybe the Orioles switch things up. And, Jackson Holliday did not walk once in the month of May. That's not really what you want he did walk once. He has not walked since May 10th. That is still a long time. So that doesn't really still sell you 100% on him in the leadoff spot long term. But we also know he has a great batting eye, and the walks are going to come for him. We'll see what they do with the lineup, but he seemed comfortable in there, and it was cool to see him get his first career leadoff home run and give the Orioles the lead from the jump on Saturday. Third thing you need to know from that one is that Coby Mayo returned with an RBI single and a bit more. As I mentioned for Friday's game with Ryan Mountcastle going on the injured list with that strained right hamstring, Coby Mayo was called up on Saturday and was the DH in the starting lineup for the Orioles. And Coby, who, was great in AAA to begin the year, has gotten a couple of stints in the big leagues and really hadn't done much, as we know, when he got sent down back on May 9th the last time. So he spent 3+ weeks basically in AAA. This was the first stint in AAA these last 3 weeks since the last demotion that he did not produce. Quite frankly, he had been terrible in those 3 weeks in Norfolk. Just a 62 WRC plus and a crazy high 38% strikeout rate for the Tide since being sent down over the past 3 weeks. And it's not going to factor a lot into the Orioles' decision to call him up because it's an easy fill-in. Mayo from Mountcastle. He's one of your top prospects. He's a guy you expect to be a big part of your team moving forward. And so they call him up, and Ryan O'Hearn smokes a double in the 4th inning, and then Coby Mayo delivers an RBI single, 100 off the bat, the first RBI of his big league career, and it puts the Orioles up 2-0 in the 4th inning. But as the throw came into home, it got cut off, and Mayo found himself in a rundown between 1st and 2nd and stayed in it long enough to get the run to score. But he basically kind of almost tackled White Sox second baseman Lenyn Sosa as he was being tagged out for the rundown to end the inning. It led to the benches clearing. There were no ejections, no punches thrown, anything, just a super weird play. Tony Mansolino kind of described it after the game. He said, when they do infield defensive drills with Coby Mayo and others in spring training and they work on rundowns, they always teach the infielders, hey, when you make a throw, get out of the baseline immediately, because if you run into a runner, it can be called obstruction and they can just be awarded the next base freely. And so Mansolino basically said he thinks Mayo may have been thinking as a fielder and saying, hey, if I run into the fielder, we'll see if I can fake it enough. They might just give me second base, because he knew he was dead to rights. It still wasn't a smart play because it was so far out of what you'd usually do as a runner. It did not look good. It looked like he went after Sosa. It was a rookie play. It's not something you want to see again. But you know what? Maybe that's a play that can get him going, right? He gets the RBI single, shows a little fire. It's not something you want, but he's going to get a little bit of a chance here to play with Mountcastle on the injured list and Rivera not producing, and Westberg still out too. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's what can get him going finally at the big league level. Now, speaking of adventurous days, the 4th thing you need to know from Saturday is that Jorge Mateo, once again, for some reason, starting in center field in Saturday's lineup. The reasons are the Orioles have a million injuries, and of course, Cedric Mullins is now on the IL as well. But he gets the start in center, and he certainly had an adventurous day. Mullins out with a hamstring injury. Mansolino said he predicts it'll just be the minimum 10-day stint on the IL for Mullins, and that he'll be back sometime, early next week. So that hopefully that is the case. But for now, you're going to have some Jorge Mateo in center field. And I do not like that at all, but that is what we saw. Now, Dylan Carlson started in center field on Friday. That's the outfield alignment I'd much rather see, but there's only so many outfielders there until Colton Cowser comes back, hopefully this week in Seattle. So Mateo got the start there on Saturday and on Sunday. Now, he walked in the third inning. Don't see him walk a lot, and he stole second. And then in the fifth, had probably the biggest swing of the day, a 2-run homer off of White Sox starter Davis Martin to put the Orioles up 4-1. His first home run of the season, 101 off the bat, got a cutter over the middle at the end of a 7-pitch at bat and took it into the bleachers in right center field. It was his first home run since June 21st of last year, a 2-run shot off of Nick Hernandez, a reliever in Houston, and just the second opposite field home run of Jorge Mateo's entire MLB career, including his time with the Padres and then with the Orioles. The only other time Mateo had hit an opposite field home run was also at Camden Yards. It was on July 27th of 2022. The Orioles were down 1 in the bottom of the 9th inning, and Mateo hit a solo shot off of Rays reliever Colin Poche that just nicked off the top of the wall and went over for a game-tying home run. So that one barely got out. I mean, this one truly landed in the seats. Basically, the best opposite field swing of Jorge Mateo's big league career is what we saw on Saturday. And despite what we'll get to with the defense, he has been swinging the bat better. It hasn't been as much of a black hole automatic out with him in the lineup right now. But there are still issues because in the 8th inning, he's still out there defensively in center. And he collides with Heston Kjerstad in right center field. It should have been a pretty easy ball for either of them. Now, luckily, Kjerstad somehow still held on and caught the ball for a huge out in a 4-2 game at that point. That ball gets down. You got a disastrous 8th inning coming up for the Orioles. Now, he kind of banged elbows with Kjerstad. Of course, it looked like it was his surgically repaired elbow that took him out in July for the rest of the season last year and had him kind of on the, not on the IL, but still dealing with it even up to spring training this year. Trainers talked to him. He stayed in the game. He seems to be fine because, again, he did start again on Sunday, and then he walked and stole another base in the bottom of the 8th inning as well. So Mateo had a home run and 2 walks in this game. Just the 3rd time in his career that he's walked twice in a game. Just the 4th time in his big league career in which he has started a game, had at least 3 plate appearances, and not gotten out. And after all that, Jordan Adams, an outfielder who the O's signed to a minor league deal this offseason and who they called up on Saturday to just have some more depth in center field, a guy who can truly play center, replaced him as a defensive replacement in a 4-2 game in center field in the top of the 9th inning. So they clearly still don't fully trust Mateo if they're calling up guys just to be defensive replacements for him in center. But they also trust him enough to start him out there back-to-back days, Saturday and Sunday, with Mullins out, and have the debacles that have happened with him out there. And it's not just Saturday. It's a lot of games we've seen him in center has been terrible. I'm good. I hope Cowser's back tomorrow and he's just in center field every day until Mullins comes back. And then you have the 2 of them. You don't have to worry about anybody else playing center field. But there's going to be some Mateo. And hopefully that's the last of it. Hopefully that is the last of it because hopefully Cowser joins the team in Seattle. But definitely the most adventurous day of the season for Jorge Mateo. And then the 5th and final thing you need to know from the Orioles' 4-2 win over the White Sox on Saturday is that the bullpen was not perfect after Dean Kremer left after his 6 strong innings, but they got it done. Yennier Cano came in the 7th. Not great. Pulled after 3 batters, gave up a run, but Keegan Aiken came in, escaped the 7th to keep it 4-2. Then allowed a 4-pitch walk to start the 8th. He came out of there. Seranthony Dominguez came in. He walked a batter of his own, but was able to put up a 0, keep it 4-2 heading into the bottom of the 8th. And then, very surprisingly, not only was I surprised, but I was actually listening on the radio as the top of the 9th was about to begin. And the radio crew, I believe it was Ben Wagner and Brett Hollander, they were shocked. Then I got home to watch on TV, and Jim Palmer in the booth on Masson was shocked that Felix Bautista was warming and coming in to pitch the 9th inning. Now, of course, it's a save situation, 4-2 in the 9th. That is Felix Bautista's situation. And he had pitched 1 back-to-back a couple of weeks ago, so it wouldn't have been his first back-to-back of the year coming off Tommy John surgery. But the fact that he threw a season-high 29 pitches on Saturday, and about 24 hours later, they're going to bring him back, and it wasn't 29 amazing pitches. It was 29 laboring pitches where he didn't look great and struggled with his command and somehow snuck out of there with a save. They're going to put him back out there. I still can't believe they did that. And now Mansolino addressed it got a question about it, obviously, in the post-game press conference, and he said that he talked with the pitching coaches and with Felix, and they submit a report to him every day, and that report showed that Felix was available for Saturday if the chance came up. And Mansolino talked about how, obviously Felix put up the 0, got the save, Orioles won the game, and he talked about how important that is for Felix's return to have a back-to-back that goes well, right? His other back-to-back in Milwaukee, that did not go well. This one wasn't perfect, but he got back-to-back saves on back-to-back days. First time he's done that since coming off Tommy John, and he thinks it'll be big for him moving forward. But I just could not believe it. Like, 29 pitches was the 8th most of any career outing for Felix Bautista. Only the 4th time that he's thrown just 1 inning in a game and thrown 29 pitches or more. And the other 8 times in his career, again, this is going back to getting called up by the Orioles in 2022. The other 8 times where Felix had thrown 29 pitches or more in a single outing, he had never pitched the next day. This was the first time ever in his career where he threw at least 29 pitches and went back in the game the very next day. And the first time to do that is in his first season. It was 2nd month coming off Tommy John surgery. And not for a team that's fighting for a division, for a team that's 16 games under 500. You combine all of that, and I truly could not believe what I was seeing. And he, once again, was not very good. And, it was not good command. It was 2 walks, but he got a big strikeout to finish it out. The Orioles won the game 4-2, and he put up the 0. Again, he threw 23 more pitches after 29 on Friday. Now, obviously, he was not available Sunday. The Orioles have the off day today on Monday, so he'll be available to pitch again if the Orioles need him on Tuesday in Seattle. But it worked out. It worries me that they did that. And it might be fine. It might be totally fine, but I was not on board at all. It's close to malpractice, it looked like, for Felix Bautista right there. I just truly cannot believe the Orioles did that, but happy it worked out and they were able to clinch a series win. So then, for the first time this year, they had a chance to sweep. Not only have they not swept, the Orioles haven't even had a chance to sweep this year. They haven't even won back-to-back games to start a series. So here we are. First chance, and they delivered. The Orioles break out the brooms with the win on Sunday, and I'll tell you how they did it to finish off the show coming up next. So the O's got the win Friday, they got the win Saturday, and they got the win on Sunday. Final score from the series finale, Orioles 3 and White Sox 2, as the O's complete their first series sweep of the year and get to 22-36 on the season through 58 games and playing a little bit better baseball. They've won 3 in a row, get the sweep. They've won 6 of their last 8 games, a little better to watch the Baltimore Orioles at this point. Still certainly some issues, and I'm going to say this, this might not be completely true, but I think people will agree if you watch the majority of the 3 games this weekend. The Orioles got 3 wins. A sweep, never say anything bad about a sweep. You win all 3 games, you have done your job in that series. But it's against the only team worse than them in the American League, the second worst team in baseball. Obviously, the Rockies are worse than both these teams with their still single-digit wins. But I felt like I've never seen a team look worse while still completing a sweep than what I saw from the Orioles this weekend. And that's why, well, the other reason why is that they're still 22-36. They're 14 games under in June. But the way they just looked is the other reason why I'm still not super crazy on board with what the Orioles did this weekend, because they still didn't look good. They won all 3 games, but they did not look good. So let's get to the 5 things you need to know from Sunday's win. First thing you need to know is Charlie Morton had another fantastic start. Talk about Dean Kremer being bad in March and April. Morton had a 9.45 ERA in that first month of the season. He lost his spot. We were talking about DFAing him. He got moved to the bullpen. And then, very under the radar, Morton posted a 3.98 ERA in May. And basically, when the Orioles signed him this offseason, they were banking on basically a 3.98 ERA from Morton. And that's what he gave you in that next month. Now, he returned to the rotation on Monday because the Orioles needed a spot starter against St. Louis, and he pitched well. 6 innings, 2 runs, 4 hits, 5 Ks, and 2 walks. His best start as an Oriole, his first quality start as an Oriole. And we talked about how that was just a spot start. The Orioles had the choice of either leaving Morton in there or bringing back Trevor Rogers this weekend after his great start in Boston last weekend, and they decided to go with Morton. And obviously the White Sox offense stinks, as we saw all weekend, but Morton was even better in his start on Sunday. His best start as an Oriole, his final line, he goes out there and gives them 6 2/3 innings of strong work, 1 unearned run scored against him on 6 hits, 7 Ks, 1 walk, and 100 pitches on the dot for Morton in this one. Just honestly looked great in this game. And you combine, I mean, the only run he allowed was unearned after just a really bad Jackson Holiday error in the 6th inning, allowed that 1 run to score against Morton for the White Sox. But you combine the 3 starts from Eflin, Kremer, and Morton this weekend. 19 2/3 innings, 16 hits, 1 earned run, 20 strikeouts, and 4 walks. That is a 0.46, again, 0.46 ERA by the Orioles rotation this weekend. Their rotation's been much, much better the past couple of weeks. Best series they've had pitching. Again, it's a bottom 5 offense in baseball. They're facing in a bottom 2 team in baseball in the Chicago White Sox, but a lot of positives. First time all year, the Orioles have gotten 3 consecutive starts of 6 or more innings from their rotation. You just love to see stuff like that we saw this weekend. And 7 strikeouts, second most of the year for Morton. First time he's pitched at least 5 innings and walked 1 or fewer batters. The curveball command is just getting better and better. Had a 50% in-zone rate on that curveball, 10 whiffs on 22 swings against it on Sunday. And it continues to dominate left-handed hitters. That's what's made Morton so good over the years, is how much that curveball dominates lefties. And in May, before this start, 167 batting average against, 41% swing and miss rate from lefties against the Morton curveball. His 15 total whiffs was his second most of the year. 10 whiffs on the curve ties a season high. Also did that in his last start on Monday. And I really thought just the bend of that curveball against lefties, he threw that back foot curveball, the down and in curve, like it was nothing. All he did is throw that back foot pitch, and White Sox hitter just swung through it again and again and again. He had just perfect command of that pitch at times. And I was definitely on board. I said this on the podcast multiple times. I would have rather the Orioles put Trevor Rogers into the rotation and put Morton back in the bullpen and given Rogers this start on Sunday. But after seeing back-to-back quality and honestly really good outings from Morton, after he had been really good in the bullpen for a while before rejoining the rotation, while I'd still like to see some Trevor Rogers, because you got to see what you got out of him, I kind of see the Orioles' decision-making process here with Charlie Morton. Because, again, even after a sweep, they are 22-36. Chances are, as Ken Rosenthal wrote last week, like the Orioles are still trying, but they're telling teams that if this continues, they are going to be sellers at the deadline. That should be of no surprise to anyone. At the very least, they're going to sell off some of these rental pieces, and Morton's one of them. He's a free agent after the year. And we know how terrible it was in the first month, but he had a sub-4 ERA in May. He just put up his best start of the year in his first one in June. The Orioles probably think that, hey, if Morton stays in the rotation and continues to pitch like this for the next month, you can legitimately trade him and legitimately get something back for him at the deadline. Pitching is at a premium. Teams want arms, veteran arms, arms that have won World Series, arms that can eat you innings. Charlie Morton can do all of that. A bunch of contending teams would go after Charlie Morton at the deadline if he's pitching like this for the next month or so. So the cost-benefit analysis from the Orioles is basically, look, we'd rather have Morton out there because that gives us a better chance of getting something for him at the deadline. And then if we trade him, not only do we get something back, but we open up more innings for Tyler Wells, Kyle Bradish, Chase McDermott, Trevor Rogers, Brandon Young, whomever, to give them starts down the stretch when we're out of it to really see what we have heading into 2026. So the O's are going to give him that chance. And again, if he starts to look like, again, the April version, he'll go back into the bullpen. But for now, it seems like it's going to be Morton's rotation spot. Now, the second thing you need to know from Sunday's win is that the Orioles put together a nice rally in the second inning. They only came away with 2 runs, but I like the at-bats that they had against Adrian Hauser, who was, had opted out of a minor league deal, signed with the White Sox, had made 2 scoreless starts with Chicago coming in. And then in the third inning, he allowed his first run of the year. Kicked it off with a Maverick Handley single, who lined one off the wall in left field, just missing his first career home run, and then tripped rounding first base, so had to struggle back and be held to a single. Then Jackson Holiday dumped a double into right field to put runners on second and third. And the Orioles came through. Ramon Arias, a bloop RBI single, makes it 1-0. Ryan O'Hearn delivers a sac fly to make it 2-0. And yeah, they only got the 2 on the board when they did have at one point bases loaded and no outs, but that's better than they've done in the past. And they finished the game 2 for 8 with runners in scoring position. You'd probably like a little bit better than that, but those 2 hits were huge and something the Orioles haven't really been doing so far this year. They made solid contact. They had 13 hard hit balls against Hauser as he pitched into the 7th inning in this one. You like some of the things you saw despite just the 3 runs from the Orioles on Sunday. And the third thing you need to know is Dylan Carlson stayed red hot in this game as well. Only had 1 hit on the day, but it was a huge insurance run. Ended up being the game winner. An RBI double in the 6th inning after an O'Hearn leadoff walk. Mayo replaced him on a fielder's choice. Carlson knocks one into the gap, and the White Sox struggled a bit with the relay. Mayo was able to score to put the O's up 3-1. Ended up being a gigantic insurance run at that point. And Carlson, since all these injuries, he's basically become an everyday outfielder. And he's been red hot. Last 8 games for Dylan Carlson, he's 10 for 28 at the plate. That's a 357 average, and he's driven in 7 runs in that stretch as well. And as Colton Cowser and Ramon Laureano are set to return this week, I mean, you have other options among Cooper Hummel, Jordan Adams, and Heston Kjerstad on the roster right now. Like, my vote is 2 of those 3 go, and Carlson keeps his spot. And even down the road when, Westberg and O'Neill return, I'm still pulling for Dylan Carlson to at least have a bench spot on this team. He plays great defense, all 3 spots. He's swinging the bat okay right now. Like, he's earning a job in the big leagues at this point. But I mentioned Kjerstad going down. The fourth thing you need to know from Sunday's Orioles win is that Heston Kjerstad is just a mess right now. Like, he had a big swing in this game, a 1-out triple in the 4th inning. His first career triple snapped an 0 for 19 skid that Kjerstad was in. And you're like, his at-bats have been so bad. He gets a triple in the 4th. You're like, great. This should get him going. Now, he probably should have been thrown out at 3rd with a better throw, but he dove in safely. And you think, hey, this is going to get him going. Nope. Immediately gets picked off on a back pick by the catcher at 3rd base to completely end that rally and the Orioles' chance to add on another run in that 4th inning. Then took a terrible route to a ball in right field that, again, was a tough catch. It was a ball off the wall, but better right fielders catch that ball, and he turns it into a triple. He did make a nice catch later in the game in the corner, but the running, the athleticism is just so awkward. He's not hitting. By Statcast, has been one of the worst defensive outfielders in baseball. He's now hitting 185 with a 539 OPS on the year. He just posted a 24 WRC plus in May. He's completely out of sorts at the plate. He can't play the field right now. And he's really only holding on to a roster spot and getting at bats because the Orioles are just so freaking injured in the outfield. But once you get Cowser, Laureano, Mullins, and at some point Tyler O'Neill back, like, even without O'Neill, I think you're going to have to send Kjerstad down, especially with what Carlson's giving you. And I know that you can make the argument, hey, this team is bad. They're not going anywhere. This is the perfect time where even though Kjerstad is struggling, you still see him as a future piece, which is true. And I still see Kjerstad as a future piece. It's just really bad right now in this moment. But you could argue, hey, they're bad. It doesn't matter. Keep him in the lineup. You don't have to play him every single day, but keep him, 4-ish games per week, 5 games per week. Keep him getting regular MLB at-bats and let him work out of it. I get that. I totally agree. And I've made that argument about a lot of prospects in the past. I'm making it about Kobe Mayo right now. But it's so bad, the defense and the offense combined, that I just think at the very least, he has options. He just needs like 2 weeks in Norfolk. I'm not saying send him down for the rest of the year. 2-3 weeks in Norfolk, once you get, Cowser and Laureano back, so you have other guys to fill the spots, and just let him reset. Because it's so bad right now that he needs a little bit of reset at this point. And the fifth and final thing you need to know from the Orioles' 3-2 win over the White Sox on Sunday to complete their first sweep of the season is that the bullpen was able to come in and shut the door. Now, Gregory Soto did allow the 1 bullpen run, solo shot allowed to Mike Tauchman in the 7th, just the 2nd home run Soto has allowed this year that made it a 3-2 game. But he got out of the 7th, got an out in the 8th. Andrew Kittredge came in, got 2 outs on 3 pitches to finish the 8th inning on a couple of grounders to keep it at a 3-2 game. And then, of course, after 29 pitches Friday, 23 pitches Saturday, Felix Bautista was unavailable. They had already used Soto and Kittredge. So the Orioles had a decision to make on who was going to get the save chance on Sunday in a 1-run game. It was the bottom third, 7, 8, 9 due up in the White Sox order. And they go with Brian Baker, who comes on for the save and goes 1-2-3 to close it out. 2nd career save for Brian Baker. The other one was October 5th of 2022. The final game of that season when the Orioles played a doubleheader against the Blue Jays. They were already eliminated from playoff contention. The game didn't really mean anything. They were up 5-4 in the 9th, and Baker did kind of the same thing, 1-2-3 with 2 Ks against the Blue Jays to get the save, which ended up being the final win of 2022 for the Orioles. But he attacked the bottom of the order, threw good fastballs, got himself a pop-up and 2 strikeouts. He four-seamer looked good velocity-wise, floated that changeup in there for a good pop-up. He He attacked Luis Robert with basically all sliders and was then finally able to strike him out with a fastball to start the inning. Brian Baker, I'll say it again, he has been the Orioles' best reliever this year, and now him finally getting a save chance and making it look easy 1, 2, 3. Just he deserved. He's been so good this year. He deserved to get that chance with Felix unavailable, and he delivered to give the Orioles finally. We made it to June, but finally their first sweep of the year. And again, it all wasn't pretty, and I don't feel much different about the Orioles than I did 4 days ago, even though they got their first sweep, because that White Sox team is bad, and the Orioles did not look particularly good beating them. But a sweep is a sweep, and it's got to feel better in that Orioles clubhouse than it has for most of this 2025 season. That'll do it for today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Orioles are off today before heading to the West Coast, but we'll still have an episode coming up on Tuesday. We're going to take a look at like all the news and notes and everything we missed. John Mabry was added to the coaching staff. We'll talk about that addition. We've got all these other IL moves, as I mentioned, Mountcastle and Mullins on the injured list. We'll talk about how the Orioles go through the roster with also maybe Cowser and Westberg returning this week as they're playing well on rehab, and just everything roster-wise that has happened over the past couple of days. We'll recap it all on tomorrow's episode. But until then, I'm Connor Newcomb, and this has been the Locked On Orioles podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.